Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 106 of the Above Board podcast. Today's conversation, we have the great pleasure of hosting business strategist and leadership coach Heidi Schalk to our show. Heidi is an author, a speaker. She's host of the Be She podcast. She has been spent the last 5 years helping women achieve their goals and building online businesses that they love. And we're really excited to talk with you today. Heidi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really excited to dive in and have this conversation with you, and grateful to be here with you. Thank you.
I've been listening to your podcast, and you've had a lot of great guests on your show too. And a lot of the conversations you talk about are like limiting beliefs and perfectionism, which jives so well with, I would say, the last like 3 to 4 months of our show. We've been like unpacking that. So I have some questions for you in that regard. But before we go there, let's maybe back up. Can I just like get a little bit of like the beginning of your journey, where you started your business, why you started it, all those good things?
Absolutely. So I started my journey 6 years ago now when I was moving through a divorce. So I had been a stay-at-home mom. My kids were really young, probably about 4 or 5 or 5 and 6. And I had been a stay-at-home mom. I worked for a nonprofit, but that was just a few hours a month, just supporting them. So it wasn't something that was going to be able to support me and my kids. And so I needed to find something a way to take care of us. And I was on Facebook and I found this business coach, and she was like, you can do what you know, and you don't have to be a coach to just get started. So I was like, oh, I can work from home and be there with my kids, because that was my biggest thing the only thing I was super clear on is I wanted to be home with my kids. I had been home with my kids. I could take them to school, pick them up. I was heavily involved in their school, and I wanted to be there for their activities. I didn't want a lot to change for them. So I wanted to keep things as consistent as possible. Unfortunately, I didn't realize entrepreneurship is a long journey, and it's not that you don't make it right out of the gate. So I worked 2 jobs as I was building my business. And I also didn't start off as a business strategy coach because, John, I knew zero about business. So that was something that evolved as my clients evolved, my business evolved, but that's how I got started. And what kept me going was really knowing that eventually I wanted to be able to leave the 2 jobs and go full time with my business, because I just knew that the important thing was for me to be home with my kids. So that's what drove me.
That's really great. But I'm curious, would you maybe just shed a little light on the role of the business coach that you had? Like, what was some of the conversations that y'all were having? Was it literally just like learning how to start a business, or was it mindset and motivation? Was it a combination of the two?
The biggest takeaway I got from her was the persistence and to keep going, because she was highly driven. She's a very successful coach in the space. And over the last 6 years, I've seen her evolve. She was successful when I worked with her, but now she's even grown and expanded upon there. And she's grown her program and her business. So now she teaches multiple things, and she works with a lot of different types of entrepreneurs, versus back then it was more around coaching. What she really instilled in me was just getting messy, really just doing it messy and moving through the fear. Because when I first started, it's really interesting that my podcast is now called Be She, Be Seen, Be Heard, Be Empowered, because that was the biggest thing that held me back in my business. I didn't realize that I had to be seen. I thought I could coach people, but in order for them to find me, I actually had to show up. And that was a paralyzing fear for me. So one time when we were in the program, it was a large program. And inside of there, I had a woman that her and I had become friendly, and she lived in England, and she was crushing it in her business working with this coach. I was not, because I was so scared to put myself out there. And she challenged me in the DM, in the messenger. She was like, I have a challenge for you. Will you accept it? And I'm like, okay, sure. What can this be? She goes, I want you to go live inside the group right now. And your topic is my breakdown to my breakthrough. And I immediately froze. My stomach dropped, my chest got tight, and my throat closed up, and I started shaking. And she said, I will support you, but I'm across the pond, and it's after midnight here. So I get to go to bed. So you need to do it now. So I hopped in there, and I was bawling, crying. And through this whole live stream, I was shaking. I wanted to, my eyes got puffy, my face blew up right away, but I did it. And then I get off of there. I shut it down. I get back in Messenger, and she's like, that was great. Now I have another challenge for you. Will you accept it? I'm like, how bad can it be now? Right? They can't be any worse than that. And she said, great. I want you to go live for the next 5 days. I said goodbye, and I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and I opened up Facebook and in that group, and there were so many messages of people saying, thank you so much for showing up so vulnerably. Thank you for showing up so raw and doing it scared. And now you've inspired me to go live. You've inspired me to step out of my comfort zone today and do something that's been scaring me. One of the coaches inside the program did an impromptu training around my live stream talking about vulnerability. So she really taught me how to open myself up and how to get vulnerable, because that was one of my biggest challenges inside of my business. And when I talk to my clients, I'm always like, you get to be vulnerable. You get to show up because your people want to know that they're not alone out there, that you've gone through something similar to them and how you've overcome it. So that's where like overcoming the fear, limiting beliefs, the perfectionism, that I learned a lot of that through that program and through that coach.
I think that's the best way to connect with people authentically, is sharing that like you're struggling with this thing too. Or I mean, as you told that story, I got nervous for like hearing that. Like I put myself in that moment for a second. If someone was like, okay, go live right now and talk about this topic, I'm such a overly prepared kind of person that makes me nervous, even just thinking about that. And I will say the role of a business coach or a performance coach or whatever, like having someone in your life like that to drive you and push you to do these things is so crucial. We talk about this on the podcast all the time because like, and I guess in a way I do financial planning for a living. And so in a way I'm a financial coach for people's lives, for financial stewardship and all that good stuff. But as a business owner, I knew enough to know what where my, I don't know if I knew what all my blind spots were, but I knew I needed someone to tell me what they were. Like and so when we hired a coach at the beginning of starting Canterpath, it was like, I told this person, like, I need that accountability and a little bit of that push and that drive, kind of like the stories that you're sharing. And is that, so talk to me about your, like, so fast forward now to present day, because I follow you on social and I've listened to your podcast and stuff, and you're doing a lot of this for other people now. Is that primarily how you're serving and showing up for people inside of your business, helping people and coaching them on how to get through these hurdles?
Yes, and a good business coach, anybody can show you the tactics. And I do. I share the tactics with my clients because they need the tactics, they need the to-dos, they need those steps. But
Mm-hmm.
also, it's important that you go deeper than that. So, because there is fear that's going to come up. And I always say, I'm like, the fear is never going to go away. It's just going to look different. And it depends on what level you're moving to. So, every time you get comfortable, that's when it's time that's when you know it's time to level up. And anytime you level up, the fear shows up again because it's out of your comfort zone. It's something new. It's something scary. When I was telling the story, John, my chest got tight, and it's my
Yep.
story, and I did it, and I've been now live hundreds and hundreds of times. The podcast I started just less than a year ago. That actually helped me. That was fear that showed up. I got to be seen again, and I was like, oh my gosh, can I really do this? This is super scary, and it's similar to going live or being on social, but it's a different platform. So it's a new step. And whenever that you take a new step in whatever you're working toward, the fear is going to show up. And a business coach needs to be able to help support you in moving you through that. And that comes with some mindset work, some different tactics, if you will, or tools that you can put into your tool belt besides just the strategy.
I hate how true it is that once you grow comfortable with something, it's time to like leg up and move on to the next thing. Because I've identified that for sure. Like I remember when we're over 100 episodes on this podcast. I remember the first hand, if you go back and listen to like episode 1 and 2, and I mean, they're raw and awful, but it's fun. It's actually fun for us to go back sometimes because we have 2 other hosts on the show and we go back and listen to it occasionally, or we'll send each other like a snippet of it, or like, I can't believe you said this, like just, it's so fun to see the evolution of it. But I hate how true that is. I mean, I like it and I hate it, how true that is, where, and maybe I'm speaking from a sense of I'm at this place in my life where I'm like, the things I'm doing are I'm feeling fairly comfortable with. And so I'm like trying to think like, what's the next thing I have to do? Because you're right. I know that's true. Like if it's not giving you butterflies or making you a little angst or a little anxious, then it's probably not pushing you further along. I mean, am I saying that right? Do you agree? You obviously agree with that, right?
100%. And this reminds me of a time where there was a speaking contest and I was looking at it and I knew it was coming up the following week and it was going to be in Miami. So I'm in Florida, we talked, but so it's going to be a couple hours away. And I was like, I don't think I have time to prepare for this. But when I was looking at it and moving through the information, I immediately started getting tense. My chest got tight. That feeling came up again. And I said, this is exactly what my next step is and what I get to do. So I signed up. And the night before, my business partner and I, she's helping me write my speech, where she drives down. I'm practicing it in the car. It was super. I was shaking go up there going through the competition, and I moved through round one, which was, I didn't expect to do that. I moved through round one, super proud. Round two, I flubbed it, but that's okay. And I am now much more confident, and I've done many speaking engagements since then. But that was the diving board, I guess, or the next step in order to get me there. But if I wasn't aware of the fear showing up, I wouldn't have moved forward with it. So I was very clear in knowing when that fear shows up and what it feels like. And I'm like, nope, this is definitely my next step. And I get to do that. So absolutely 100% what you said is I'm on board with.
I think it's cool that you identify. I mean, I doubt you flubbed it, but like I'm using your words, not mine. But I think it's important that you identified that, because then I would imagine that helps come back to do it again. When you realize, like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, you didn't advance past round two,
Mhm.
like you got over it. You lived to fight another day. And I think when you realize, like, whatever these fears were that were in your head about the thing that you were going to do, and then maybe like the not ideal scenario panned out, and you're like, well, that wasn't actually that bad. Like that's how I am. Like I don't do a ton of speaking, but I've done it enough, and I've had success at it, and I've had failures at it. But when I have the failures, I'm like, that wasn't really that bad. You know, it's not
Mhm.
like I just went up there and completely blanked or whatever. And I guess one of the things I want to ask you is, how do you, I mean, getting maybe like a little more tactical and making this sort of a free, semi-free coaching session on our podcast, I guess. But how do you deal with, like, what are some tactics for maybe releasing some of those limiting beliefs, or I call it imposter syndrome for me. I mean, I have those moments where I'm like, I shouldn't be doing that. How do you, what do you do? Is it self-talk? Is it, what's maybe some things that you've seen work with your clients that you've coached?
The first thing is just identifying what they are. Like when it comes to limiting beliefs, like writing down, what is that limiting belief? I'm not worthy.
Mm.
I'm not good enough, and that's where the imposter syndrome will come in. Just really identifying what those are for you and writing them down. And then what I tell my clients to do is, okay, when's the first time you can remember that feeling coming up? Because we're not born with these limiting beliefs. These are not some, like, we are born fearless. Babies just take off and go. They take one step, they fall. If they quit then, we'd never walk. So they just keep going and keep trying. They don't know any better. So that's where we get to, as we're evolving and growing, but really identifying when's the first time that you can remember. I'm not saying that's the first time that this came up, but when's the first time you can remember you feeling that limiting belief, or you talking to yourself about it. And then journaling for me has transformed everything. And I was against it for a long time. I heard all the powers of journaling and I'm like, that won't work for me. But once I started doing it, all those, like, I just started unpacking more and more about where my limiting beliefs were coming from. And I was able to move through it. Now I can recognize them quicker and I can move through them quicker. They don't go away forever. They do creep up. So journaling was a big thing for me, and it's a big thing that I use with my clients for the tactic of moving through it. Identifying when it first showed up. Are they really, because once you can determine when you first felt them or said them to yourself, are they really yours? Because
Mm.
did somebody tell them to you, or did you hear them from someone else, or did you think that somebody was, when they were talking to you and you felt this, was, are they really your beliefs? Because most of the time they're not. They come from someone in our history.
I have done that exercise for myself before. And when I was going through this, what I identify went all the way back to like an 8-year-old version of me that was up at the plate. I played baseball growing up. And we talked about this down in South Florida, kind of we grew up in similar close by towns. And I remember standing at the plate, striking out, and just this fear of embarrassment, and thinking, and I don't know if I can think of other instances since that time, but now as an adult, I look back and I'm like, well, gosh, this is so kind of like what I was mentioning before. It's like the worst case scenario is I struck out. If you're a Major League Baseball player in the Hall of Fame and you hit 3 out of 10 times, you're in the Hall of Fame. Like, you're going to fail 7 times out of 10 and you're still going to be a successful person. And for whatever reason, when I was a kid, I couldn't overcome that. And then like that translated to a lot of people have a fear of public speaking, and which is a lot of what you've shared, going live, like speaking at these events. So many people, I mean, that does make their chest tight and gives them anxiety. And it's just that is such a simple exercise. To maybe it's time consuming and it takes effort to like think back, but that's not a hard exercise. You don't have to pay a therapist to work you through that. So like you could just literally sit down, journal, and think through those things. And I started journaling last year too. So it's funny that you mentioned that. I never did it. I was against it. I don't know why. I think it was more of just a time thing. I have two small kids, and I'm like, at the end of the day, the last thing I have time to do is sit here and journal. But I started with our business coach actually gave us the 5 minute journal. That's what he turned us on to start. Is that have you heard of that? Have you used that one, or do you do more just conventional like journaling?
I haven't heard of that, but that's how I start too. Because journaling
Yeah.
can be daunting. It can, like you said, we have busy
Right.
lives. I'm a single mom of two kids, and now they're teenagers. Just the busyness never goes away. But it's really important that we prioritize it, and it doesn't have to be an hour-long process of journaling. You literally can sit down for 5 minutes, like doing anything, even when it comes to like decluttering. Just set your timer for 5 minutes. You can do 5 minutes, right? And then
Yeah.
as the more you do it, then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I sat here for 10 minutes or I sat here for 20 minutes, and it just starts flowing.
What I love about the 5 minute journal is it asks you, it kind of guides you through it. It says, hey, what are three things that you did today that
Mm.
you enjoyed, that you're grateful for? What are two things you could have improved today? It forces you to, rather than just a blank sheet of paper. And if you've never done it before, that's a difficult exercise. You kind of need some guidance. Hey, thanks for tuning in to our show. Are you looking for shorter daily episodes of Above Board delivered straight to your Amazon Alexa? Join Canterpath 365 and get our daily brief with market updates, financial news, and mini podcast snippets like from today. Sign up now at canterpath365.com and we'll see you there. I have a question for you, just shifting gears a little bit, because we did touch on this, but dealing with unhealthy levels of perfectionism. I'm curious of your opinion there. It's in my industry. We had an awesome, if you've heard of like EOS or Traction before, we had Mike Payton from the Entrepreneurial Operating System on our podcast last year. And we talked about dealing with perfectionism. And he said, well, John, you're in this industry where you don't have a choice but to be perfect. Like if you make a mistake for somebody, there are real consequences in that in the financial planning world. And it made me realize over the course of I've been doing this for 16 years. I'm like, yeah, I've dealt with it. Like everything always has to be perfect. And then that's sort of translated in a negative way to a lot of different areas of my life, because we both know that's not attainable. And it's just now and recently where I'm trying to unwind that and realize like, it's okay to make an imperfect step, but if I'm headed in the right direction, there's still progress in that. What would you say to that? I mean, have you dealt with perfectionism in your own life or with clients that you coach?
Yeah, before I was divorced, and when it came to the kids' birthday, like their birthday parties were over the top because everything had to be perfect. So I call myself a recovering perfectionist because it's something that always like shows up. But I recognize it quicker and I move through it. And one thing that I learned that I always keep in the back of my head is messy makes millions. And when we try to show up perfect all the time, or try to show up perfect or be perfect, it stalls our growth. It keeps us from actually getting things done in the entrepreneurial space. I completely understand where in your financial space, like for your clients, you definitely get like you have to have everything, your ducks in a row. But when it comes to being an entrepreneur online, it's just do it messy, move through the fear, because people don't like perfect. People don't resonate with perfect. People resonate with authentic and real. And I think when we're trying to be perfect, like you mentioned earlier, it's not authentic because we're trying to attain something that one is, like you said, is unachievable. And I realized for me, when I was trying to be perfect, I was in comparison. I had comparisonitis. If that's a word. I was comparing myself to other entrepreneurs out there who show up online perfectly. And I was never going to be able to attain that. And it really stalled my progress. So what I tell my clients is when you're trying to be perfect, what's underneath that? Is it because you're seeing someone else out there doing it and you're thinking that you have to measure up to that because that is their journey and you get to walk your own journey? Does that make sense?
It does. Something else that comes up for me is analysis paralysis. So when it comes to perfectionism, you have this I don't know, maybe it's something that you're posting online, like to show the world, and you want this to be, you overthink it, and then it gets like 4 likes anyway. You're like, oh man, that's been our experience. We have a great social media following, and it's mostly our client community that engages with us. And so we'll put a lot of effort into stuff. And it hasn't been until recently where I'm like, I don't think we need to put that extra level, like the input that we put doesn't get the output anyway, and it's okay if it's not perfect. Like we're still getting the message across, and that's been really hard for me to be okay with. But I like the quote that you had, which is messy makes millions. I think that's a really good, that might even be the title of this episode now, because I thought that was so cool. But that is so helpful because so many people want to, especially like in the world of Instagram reels and highlights on social media, like you want to put your perfect version of yourself out there. No one really connects with that. I mean, I scroll through my feed and I'm like, oh, man, that's not authentic. That's not real. Right?
Yeah.
But you were about
Yeah.
to say something. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, the way that social media is moving now is like a year ago, even the highly curated videos were working and reels, they're not working now. People don't want
Mhm.
them, they're burnt out on them, and which makes it easier for us entrepreneurs. We don't have to spend so much time in the editing space. They want real, they want raw. I wear a baseball cap a lot in my lives, and and that resonates because it's not perfect. I'll go live from the car and be like, I have something to share and I'm from the car, and I'll pull over and have that conversation. And people like that. They like real. Like you said, authenticity. Authenticity is what people need to see, especially in the climate of today's world. And when it comes to them, people wanting to purchase from you, whether it's a product or a service, they want to know that who they're working with is real and understands them. And if everything's too perfect, they're going to feel like they can never attain that. So they're going to move on to someone else that feels real and that connects with them. Just like you said, the connection, collaboration and connection are currency. And if you're not connecting with your audience, they're not gonna stick with you. And
That's
I
so
also tell
true.
my clients, like, celebrate those 4 likes, like celebrate those
Yeah.
wins. There's 4 people. I teach entrepreneurs how to create their a signature virtual event, and they're like, "Well, what if only 2 people show up?" You pour into them, 2 people that you didn't have. What if
Yeah.
20? Or they're like, "What if 20 people show up?" If you had 20 people show up at your front door, you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, that's 20 people." But if they're showing up online, you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's 20 people." Like those are 20 people that are actually spending time with you. They like you that much to where they're going to take time out of their busy schedule because you have value for them that you're providing. So whether it's one person, 20 or 2,000, celebrate it as if it's the same.
I'm really glad you said that. And the one thing I'll add to it is, for the folks that let's say follow our online community, a lot of them don't actually engage. Well, they don't engage in the conventional ways of liking, sharing, or that type of thing. But then I'll have a client meeting with somebody and they go, "Gosh, I saw this thing, this podcast that you did where you talked about your dad or so," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you listened to that? I had no idea." They know, unless if they never told me that, I never would have known, because they didn't like it, they didn't share it, they didn't comment anywhere on social media, but they're still consuming it. I think that's another important thing that's worth mentioning. A lot of people will consume the information. They may not engage in the way that you want them to, for the likes and impressions that give us that dopamine hit and make us feel good. But that doesn't mean that people are not listening and following. And I mean, I could go through dozens of instances just in the last month where someone has said, "Hey, I sent so and so your way. They listened to your podcast and they're ready to talk with you." And I always tell people, like, there's 2 reasons that someone works with a financial planner. They know, like, and trust you. So there's that transference of trust that occurs. And then they have a pain point high enough to want to work with a financial planner. Something complicated enough in their life where they say, "I need to outsource this. I need to work with somebody." Right. But that transference of trust can't happen if they don't know you. And if you're not showing up online and communicating with them, I mean, that's such a swing and a miss in my industry, because I think people are afraid to be online and communicate their opinions and maybe show up authentically, but it's not, this highlight Instagram reel. It's not perfectionism. I think a lot of people are afraid to show up that way. I have a question for you. So I know this is what you help folks with, and you help them build a social presence and build an online brand. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, just out of curiosity, like your niche, the folks that you like working with? What's an ideal client for you that you help in building their business?
I work with mostly with female entrepreneurs. I have worked with men, love working with men, but with my story, it resonates more with women. So that's just kind of where my business was led. So I work with female entrepreneurs. I've worked with women who are, whether they're selling a product or selling a service online, that is the people that I work with. And they're wanting to, it's either they're brick and mortar moving online or they're specifically online, but I focus
Okay.
mostly completely in the online space. And I work with them on creating their signature virtual event because I believe that is the best and easiest way to create one strategy that you can rinse and repeat over and over again. We tweak it each time, but just to get better and better. But that's how you're going to create an audience that, like you said, knows, like, and trust you based on your virtual event because they can be with you. They can spend time with you. Automation and AI is great, but at the end of the day, again, that connection is currency and they can't connect with you if they're not able to spend time with you. Like you said, people don't always engage in social media posts. They need more of that high touch. And that's where these signature virtual events help them grow a business quicker than just trying to show up on social media.
Is the signature virtual event, can you describe what that is? Is that like that's the thing that they're highest and best, like they are good at this thing and they do that over and over again? Is that what that means? Or
Yeah, they're basically teaching for either 3 or 5 days on something specific to them. So they may
cool.
teach on a few different things to move somebody through their transformation, but we pick one and we focus on getting their audience a quick win. A ball in motion tends to stay in motion. So the more we can give our audience wins, the more likely they're going to continue down the path in the funnel of working with you. So that's what we do. We do it, and they can do it on, depending on whether they're, this is a side hustle and they are wanting to move into full-time freedom, or this is what they're fully focused on. Then we can decide, okay, how many times are we going to rinse and repeat this on a monthly, weekly, or whatever that looks like specifically for them. It looks different for everybody because they're based on their lifestyle and their business and also their goals.
I really like that. I know this is a weird analogy, but it's almost like you're like a stand-up comedian, which sounds like some of the most stressful work. Like I know we all watch like these Netflix specials of these stand-up comedians and we're like, that's, they look so smooth and easy. And we're quick to say like, that wasn't a funny joke or whatever. That is a very stressful thing. But what I've learned in watching some of these specials is they do this on rinse and repeat 3 to 5 nights a week. They're they're practicing their material to perfect it. And it's
Mhm.
kind of cool thinking like, you're helping someone work on their stand-up act, like the thing that they want to perfect, and they get to do that over and over again. It almost helps a little bit, I think, maybe with that perfectionism, because if that the one that you did wasn't perfect, it's okay. I'll get them next time. Like now I know how I want to tweak that and how I want to do that again. I think that's like that's a really cool concept that you help people with.
Yeah, the first time isn't going to be perfect. It's probably going to be
Right.
horrible, but you
Yeah.
can't get better unless you're doing the thing and you're repeating it. And also, this is going to set them up for other things. Now once they do their signature virtual event and they've flushed it out and they've gotten better and better at it, then one, their messaging is going to improve because now they're dialed in on what the pain point of their ideal client is, what the solution that their ideal client is wanting that they can provide, what the gap in the market is, how they fill it, so that they can draw those people to them and they become a standout person in the market space. And then also just being on podcasts like with you, John, like they're once they have that dialed in, everything else is going to be getting easier. If they want to speak on stages, they now have their talk
Yeah.
because it's already been fleshed out.
That's so cool. Folks, if this episode is so awesome, I would really encourage you to go check out Heidi's podcast, the Be She podcast. The last month or so, you've had two in specific. So I want to ask you in a second, but I'm going to let you know that the two that I've loved are the power of self-leadership and then mastering time and boundaries. Heidi, do you have a like if you were to say like go listen to my podcast, is there one that you would direct people to right now, or is it just kind of there's a plethora of ones that you enjoy?
We have so many different conversations. I do interview people and I love doing that because
So
I learn
good.
from them and it's so fun. And we have that conversation, like we're free flowing conversation, which is, I think, is the best. I would say the leadership one is big because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what people tell you. Like I can give you the tactics, John, you can help your clients the way you do. But at the end of the day, we get to take responsibility for where we are and where we aren't.
Mhm.
So, and it's self-leadership that's going to get you to where you go. Yes, mentorship is important. Surrounding yourself with community is important. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to your success, and where you are is your responsibility. And when we can get clear on releasing the blame from anywhere else, especially when we have a team, it's right. We could say, oh, well, it's their fault. At the end of the day, it's my fault. If something went wrong or didn't happen, or I'm not achieving the goals that I want to achieve, it starts with me. And by me being responsible for it, I can get clear on where the gap was, what worked and what didn't work, which is huge. And I tell my clients every day, end your day. What didn't work today? Awesome. We get to tweak that and ship that tomorrow. What worked? Ended on a win. But at the end, but it's all based on on our responsibility and taking responsibility for everything in our life and in our business.
I think what I liked about it is I hadn't heard it framed that way before. Self leadership, because I think that's scalable to anybody. Like that, this applies to anybody in life. You know, you don't have to be a business owner with dozens or hundreds of employees working beneath you. Like it could just be you doing your own thing, trying to just get better in life. And like you said, it just has to do with accountability. So I love it. The other thing that you do that's really cool on social media is the 10 minutes to win it. I very much enjoy it. And you said this already. It was an adapted version of this quote, but one of the things that I wanted to end, I usually end our podcast on a quote. And today's quote is quoting you, which is, fear is still showing up no matter where you are along your journey. I think that's an awesome quote. Heidi, thank you so much for hanging with us today. I mean, selfishly, I get so much out of doing these podcasts. That's why I love having guests on our show, so we can, and experts in their field, so we can talk through these things. Where besides the podcast, what would be the best way for folks to find you on social?
You can find me on Facebook at Heidi Schalk. You can also find me on Instagram, Heidi Schalk Coaching. That's probably the easiest place to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the platforms. And I thank you for mentioning 10 minutes to win it. I just started that I'm on my week 4, and it's been so fun. And again, it just, the more you're out there and the more you're speaking, and that was a little nerve wracking when I started because it was something new, right? But the more you do things, the better you get. So I'm so grateful that you've tuned in for that. So yeah, Heidi Schalk Coaching and Instagram is probably the best way. And then all my other platforms are inside of there. You can find me everywhere.
Well, it's a real testament that you practice what you preach. Like, you're helping folks on this stuff, but you're showing up. It's the power of consistency. Like, you're showing up and doing these things. Like the first story you shared when you had to go live, on a whim and talk about this topic, and you were crying through it and you were working through your emotions through it, to fast forward now, everything that's happened in between that time has been the consistency of showing up and doing this. And so that the 10 minutes to win, it's almost like it's kind of like a mini podcast almost that you go do live. So I think it's so cool. So folks, check her out. She's awesome. This conversation was so fun. As always, thank you so much for being a listener to the Above Board podcast. We love these conversations. We love our listeners. Something I want to mention, if you prefer to watch these conversations instead of just listening to them, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our podcast. You can find us at Candor Path, or you can just search the Above Board podcast on YouTube. So thank you so much all for listening to us today. Heidi, thank you so much for being on the show with me, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. See ya.